Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of When I Grew Up. On today's episode, it is my pleasure to welcome my guest, John Cho. Hey John, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Blair?
I'm great. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me tonight. I'm really excited. You guys, I don't know anything about what he does, but we met randomly in Atlanta.
It was pretty random.
Yeah, and one thing led to another, and you were actually sharing with my husband David about what you do. And then David got super excited and he was like, Blair, you have to meet this guy. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. And then I'm gonna say, John, what is it that you do?
Great. Yeah. So, if you want to talk about what my title is, so I am the Vice President of Digital Platform Services and Technology at a company called Robotic Research, which is also, you can look it up as rr.ai.
Mhm.
And if I just had to put just in the simplest terms what that company is all about, their specialty is off-road autonomous driving vehicles. So think like if you ever thought of like ice truckers from
Mhm.
Discovery Channel, you see those trucks out in the middle of nowhere in Canada moving logs, and that's a real dangerous job.
Uh-huh.
And so we look to automate those trucks so there's no drivers in those trucks, and because at the end of the day, like it's really dangerous and it's just not a fun job if all sorts of stuff goes on in the background. So that's what we do. We build robotic trucks and other types of vehicles that basically drive themselves. And so my particular job is really working to modernize the IT platforms and securing the company from things like property theft or like intellectual property being stolen, like source code, software, hardware, and just helping the company also accelerate their ability to get their products, these robots, into the market. So hopefully that gives you in a nutshell what I do.
Okay, that's crazy. I mean, for somebody that like knows nothing about that world at all, first of all, I had no idea that those trucks that you were talking about, are unmanned, and they're just so. Okay, so in this example that you gave,
Yeah,
like, how do the trucks get out there in the first place?
that's a good question. So I do want to say it was a startup. It is a startup.
Uh huh.
So
Uh huh.
this is an emerging industry. And so I'm not the only, I mean, if you look up autonomous driving trucks, there's a lot of companies trying to do this.
Okay.
And of course, the most famous car company that's out there right now trying to do that is Tesla.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in the example I gave you, there's a type of semi truck called a Class 8 truck. It's one of the heaviest trucks out there, and it's designed for both on-road, meaning on driving on highways, as well as off-road vehicles. And so if you think about it, when you're doing like lumber, no one's going to build paved roads all the way to the forest because once you chop down all the trees, it's just way too much money and too much time, especially in those extreme conditions,
Mm-hmm.
to to build roads to wherever you're going to deliver lumber. So these trucks have to get off the road and go to where those lumberjacks are and let them load up the lumber there and then drive them out of there without getting stuck. So these are pretty heavy duty trucks. They're not just
Right.
your average semi trucks.
Right.
And so we have we've been working with a couple of companies, both in the Canadian sector or the Canadian area, as well as down in Texas. They do a totally different thing, and we basically have been working to automate these trucks. And so, getting the drivers out of those trucks is important because it's frankly the drive is very dangerous,
Mm,
and it just costs money. You
yeah,
gotta pay these guys to
for
risk their
sure.
lives to do this. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's kind of I've never actually thought about that, but um it's like you know what I mean? Like I mean that's what I really love about this podcast platform, John, is I talk to people and literally areas of my life that I never thought were even like, something I should think about. But this is very important. Like even just for the way the future is, like where we're headed right now too,
Right.
like it's not that far off. And um okay, so you said that your job specifically is to protect the what did you
The
call it?
technology.
The
Yeah,
technology. Okay,
right.
so like can you get a little more into without like I don't know how much you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
share with me,
sure.
but
So it's no secret. Like, so robotics is what we would call a dual use technology. In the grand scheme of things, it's a technology that could be used for, when they say dual use, it could have a civilian commercial use, and
uh-huh.
frankly, it could have a military use.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so when we talk about protecting this technology, there are um, other companies, there are other countries that would like to take this technology and use it for their own means. Sometimes it's to
Sure.
make a competing product. Sometimes it's to use it for other things that are more around the nation state side of things. So this technology is highly coveted.
Mm-hmm.
And so to protect it, it means, making sure that the data and the software can't be easily copied, can't be tampered with. There's also people who would like to find ways to take like a robot like this and make it go left instead of go right, or make it go fast
Mm.
and then go instead of going slow.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, so my job is to make sure that we secure this technology. And then the other part of what I do is making sure that our technology is easily usable. We try and make sure that our employees can work without having to get stuck trying to figure out how to, like, say, anything from using their projectors to making sure their laptops are doing what they are supposed to be doing, to making sure that they
Mm.
have an area, maybe we build servers in the cloud so they can actually run simulations. So we help them do all that without them
Mm-hmm.
having to think about it. They just need to focus on building the products and making sure that those products are being developed and tested.
Wow. Okay. So what does a typical day for you look like then as a VP of all of those things that you said?
It's pretty busy. So, if you've had any experience or you've seen what startups are like, it's very fast paced.
Mm.
And so typically what would happen is, I'll probably come in, pretty early in the morning, and we'll have, like, the best way I could describe it is we'll have a series of quick meetings up front in the morning to try and understand what are some things that have to get done during the day.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it requires you to sometimes make decisions in the morning and realize that you need to do a pivot and make another decision that might change what you made in the morning, because in a company, in a startup, that can literally happen. Like, you could be one moment having a position of doing something, and then something has changed like by lunchtime, and then you're having to rethink that decision in the afternoon.
Oh my goodness.
So it's about having a lot of patience.
Mm.
It's also making sure that you have to be flexible in a startup, because that's just part of the game. It's not like people are just disorganized. Sometimes you literally have to figure out, okay, this didn't work, and if we dwell on this too long, then that's going to be bad for the company, because we're a small company. We're only
Mm-hmm.
about 300 something people.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about that, if you don't use your money correctly and you spend too much time doing something that is not right, then you might be spending a lot of extra money that you otherwise could have spent doing something that would make the company successful.
Sure. Um, okay. Sorry, this is really random, but but like as you're talking, I realize what qualifies a company as a startup company?
Oh, no, that's a good question. So generally speaking, startups are usually companies that have this, either a service or a product that they're trying to basically build and sell broadly, like commercialize it. Um,
Mm.
so many times, like a good example, like Tesla, which I'll go back to Tesla. The idea of an electric car was, prior to that whole company starting up, was sort of a pipe dream. Like, people weren't really sure that that could really happen, or it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. And
Mm-hmm.
so that company had a unique idea of making cars, run on just electricity.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a total game changer. It had never been done. So generally speaking, startups have products and services that are entering the market. They're usually pretty new or haven't been
Mm.
done before,
I
or
see.
there's something newer about what they're doing. They don't have, a lot of startups have investors, but they don't necessarily have they're not stable. I would say
Mm-hmm,
that
mm-hmm.
there's still it still remains to be seen if the company is going to be viable. So it's a bit risky. Like that's why some folks say, you know what, and that's totally fine. I'm just not going to do startups. That's a little bit scary for me.
Right, right.
Um, but that's what a startup is generally is. It's basically a small company that's trying to build a product or a service that can be then sold broadly and to a point where the company is sustainable and growing. And yeah, I mean it's basically that.
Okay, so how old is RR?
That's a great question. So most startups, generally speaking, are maybe anywhere from just a few months to, 3 or 4 years. Robotic research is over 20 years old.
Oh
And
wow.
so let me explain a little bit about that. So the first 20 years of its existence, it wasn't a startup. It was an engineering consulting company for the government.
I
And so
see.
they service like the Department of Defense and places like that. And then the technology, as they were building technology, they were able to realize early on, wow, we have something here. Like, and they began to patent this technology. And then
Mm,
investors said, you know what, this technology is, it's very compelling. We think you shouldn't just be a consulting company. We think you should build real products off of this technology and you
okay.
should sell it. And so investors are like, let us help you do that. And of course, the investors are obviously looking at trying to make a lot of money off of something like this. So
Sure.
they give you money up front, and then you are supposed to go deliver a product that's going to, sell like gangbusters, and then they get their little cut at the end. And so that's kind of the happy story of a successful startup.
Oh wow. Okay. So just recently, in the last 20 years, is when they kind of qualified as a startup.
Well, I would even argue like this, just to be clear, Blair. So I think the first 20 years, it wasn't really a startup. It was a very niche consulting services company. But at the end of 2021, a bunch of investors came together and said, we're going to give you money and we want
Uh-huh.
you to pivot from being a engineering services company to being a startup.
I see.
So
Okay.
starting in 2022, we became a startup. We
That's
stopped
crazy.
becoming this old 20-year-old robotics company that just did stuff for the government, and we started building stuff for ourselves and decided to go, we want to go commercial. We're not just going to sell our hours, as consultants to the government. We're going to actually build stuff, build real robots, and we're going to sell them to Europe, we're going to sell them to Asia, we're going to sell them to the United States.
Oh wow. Okay. That's amazing. Have you been there for a while?
No. So I started my journey with robotic research. It would seem like a while, but it was probably like June of last year, June of
Oh
2022.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like then that means you were a necessary component to the startup.
Yeah, they actually, right. That's actually, well, without tooting my horn too much,
No,
they
but
had
it's okay.
they
You
had
can do that here.
they had very specific things that they were looking for. So they want
Sure.
to assemble a team of people who know what they're doing, will
Mm,
generally do it the right way the first time, and so and get them all together and say, you know, we got to go for the gusto and achieve these objectives.
okay. Okay,
So
that makes
so yeah,
sense. That makes
yep,
sense. So you're talking about protecting the technology itself. Can I ask you, like in a broad term, what does that look like? Because for me, I'm
sure.
like, what does that mean? Like you're implementing software to protect it. People are
Oh
actually
yeah.
physically coming to steal it. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I mean, it could be so the most simplest things would be like, encrypting your hard drives, right?
Okay,
Just
okay.
just making sure that the data, if someone was to take the hard drive out of the laptop or out of a computer, like they couldn't actually read it.
I see.
But you also want to encrypt things as it's transmitting across the network. So it's not just encrypting what we call data at rest. You want to encrypt it as it's transmitting or as it's moving. And then you also want to, I would say, you want to make the code, um, you want to modularize the code so that if they take a piece of the code,
Mm-hmm.
they're not taking the whole thing. Um,
Oh.
yeah, so that and I guess another way, so there's another way to look at this too. Like, so for the robots, we want to make sure, for instance, like you can't tamper with the robot. So
Mm.
if you try to put like your USB stick in there and try to like download stuff into the robot, we would want to turn off that port so you couldn't do that.
Okay,
Um,
that's so scary.
yeah, or if you think about um, like airplanes, I mean, you don't want
Oh,
someone to just come into an airport, get down on the tarmac and start messing around with the plane.
right,
So
right.
it's easy to dress up maybe as a fake, technician and go out there and do stuff. So they have to put in things that you know, uh, you know, they have to put in like access controls, like username and password is probably one way to look at it, but making sure that you can't just access the computer system just when you want.
I
You're gonna have
see.
to control that and make sure that only authorized people can do that.
Okay, man, that's crazy to think about. Just like someone coming and like trying to mess with that kind of technology. It's like things I watch in the movies, John.
It's real stuff. It's real stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, so you mentioned movies and so I'll tell you something else I do that's a little bit interesting.
Yeah.
So I work at the National Academy of Science. I'm a consult for the Science and Entertainment Exchange. And so when you mention movies, it's funny. So what ends up happening in that it's a pro bono job. So sometimes we'll have producers or movie writers or directors come in and say, I've got this idea, or I have this movie, or I have this TV show. It's a
Uh-huh.
sci-fi TV show, and it's season 3, and like the fans are saying there are these plot holes, and we got to come up with believable like resolutions to those plot holes.
Uh-huh.
So they'll come to people like myself and say, okay, what's believable that we can say about, say, like hacking into a computer? So
Right.
if you watch some of these, sci-fi shows and they show like people on a computer trying to hack and they're breaking, they have like thousands of passwords they're typing in, or they're using some kind of automated system to break into something. It's gotta be believable, right? It's gotta
Uh-huh.
look
Uh-huh.
like they know it's not like some fake stuff. So
Uh-huh.
people like me will consult with these guys and say, okay, here's what kind of like the real world looks like when it comes to this sort of stuff, so that when they do create something that's really cool, it's believable enough that the audience will say, yep, that makes sense.
What? That's so cool. I mean, I guess that makes sense that they would do that. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and
That's really
every sci-fi movie
fascinating.
does that, right? So like if you think of like World War Z, or you think of Star Wars or Star
Right.
Trek, I mean, they if you think about a lot of the technology that they're showing there, yeah, it's very futuristic, but they have to talk to real scientists and engineers and people who know that space. Like World War
Right.
Z, they probably talk to virologists and they talk to, people who are in the healthcare field to understand what does a pandemic look like when you have a virus going crazy like all over the place, right?
Right. Right. Oh my
So
goodness.
they need to be able to make it believable so that the audience will say, yep, that's exactly what I would have imagined it to be like.
That's fascinating. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I guess I've seen that, like cop shows too. They have to ask real cops, like, how is this
Yeah.
believable? Makes sense.
Yep.
Um, so I have to ask John, like, can you take me all the way back to the beginning? Like, as far back as you can remember. Because I'm so curious, like, what was it like for you growing up? Uh, yeah, you told me before we started recording that you were born in Texas,
Yeah.
but I'm so curious. Like, how does one become somebody that is sought out for this particular job in this company?
Yeah. So I mean, if let me just be clear, like there's no overnight success and stuff like this.
Yeah.
I think just like a lot of Asian American kids, I had a lot of expectations put on me by my parents.
Mm,
They wanted me to be either like some sort of engineer or a lawyer or a doctor, no different from the next kid who had a similar life experience. And I was determined to do something
mm,
like that. I mean, it wasn't like totally like, no, I'm not doing that.
sure.
I wanted to, I didn't have anything else going on. So yeah, that's the only thing I knew. Let's go do it. I think what it really took is as you get through high school and as you get through college, what I try to tell people who are really wanting to understand this is that it requires real introspection, meaning
Mm.
I think you have to have a an honest view of who you are. And when I say honest, another word I could use is humble. You have to really know who you are. And
Mm.
if you don't, I'm not saying you've got to know exactly who you are, but you've got to really be chasing that process down of understanding and committing yourself to understanding the things that your body, your mind resonate with.
Mm.
I also think the other part of this, it takes courage because
Mm.
honestly, you may feel like you want to do something, but your mom and dad, or maybe your friends, or maybe just the general expectation is that you should be doing this other thing.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's going to take courage. I want to also say this, like it's totally fine if you don't decide to do like crazy stuff or explore things that maybe is contrary to what maybe your parents want you to do.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. I
Right.
don't think I'm saying that you shouldn't do what your parents want you to do. What
Mm.
I'm saying is I think to get to where I was, I think I had to really think hard about what I wanted to do. And I did. I spent a lot of time in high school and middle school imagining and daydreaming about what I'd like to do. And I was okay with, pursuing science and engineering because I like technology. And at the
Mm.
time, they seemed pretty similar. So, I felt like, well, I'm going to probably need a lot of that knowledge. So it's no big deal. I should just go ahead and do that.
Mm.
But I think I told myself if the opportunity comes, I'm going to try. I'm not saying I succeeded, but I'm going to try to have the courage to try and explore that. And there's
Mm.
been several times where I didn't do that because I was too scared or I procrastinated or I just
Mm.
felt like maybe I spent too much time thinking about it and then the opportunity passed. That's okay. I think that journey is more about following through in that process, knowing that it's going to be you're not going to waltz through that. You're going to bumble through that. It's not a
Mm.
easy process. So
Yeah.
I think if you commit yourself to understanding who you are and how you fit, I would not say that this generation is really fortunate. Our parents and our parents' parents didn't necessarily have those kind of choices. So we
Right.
do. And so I think it's important to try and see that. And I think in the Asian American community, like let's just say the entertainment scene, I mean, it's kind of frankly, it's going like gangbusters for a lot of folks. I mean, you see the Chinese and the Korean Americans out there really, they're in Marvel Universe. They're doing all sorts of crazy stuff now that frankly, back in the 60s and 70s was very rare. Like you just didn't see it.
Right.
So I think the sky is the limit. I think it's about imagining it. I think the tough part of it is, you've got to figure out how you're going to wrestle with what you really believe you want to do.
Mhm.
And like my daughter, she is a senior in high school, and she wants to do certain things that I'm not necessarily sure she should be doing. But I've told her, look, if you really love that, if you're really passionate about it, then
Mm.
I think you need to wear some thick skin, and you need to be willing to fight for that.
Yeah.
I mean, you just need to be. I mean, that means you might even fight with me, like honestly, because I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to be your dad, and I'm here to help you make the right decisions.
Yeah.
We can be friends later, but I love you and I want you to do the right thing. And at the same time, I know that I'm not always right. That
Mm.
I do know that there's times where I've got maybe just a different view from you,
Mhm.
and I may be wrong. I may have underestimated who you are,
Mm.
daughter. So you're going to have to convince me, and you may have to fight tooth and nail. But if you're passionate about it, I don't really tell her this part, then I'm probably going to support you in the end. But
Right.
right now, as far as I'm concerned, I don't agree with you, so it's up to you to convince me.
Yeah. You guys hear that? Everyone listening right now? No, okay. Yeah, I mean that's really I think a lot of it what you just said for me is actually, John, everything you just said, I agree with, but there's this question, right? It's like, okay, in theory, all of that makes sense, but
Mhm.
how does one like because to be that self-aware and have an understanding of things that you like, I
Yeah.
honestly believe is like very challenging these days. I would even argue even more so. Like you can, you know, uh, challenge me on this, but like because we're so inundated with social media too, I almost feel like sometimes people are telling you this is what you like, this is what you like, this is what you like. But then it's like, do I really like this? Like, and do we even have
Yeah,
time to reflect on this is what I like? You know what I mean? Because it's like always just fast paced, I feel these days. But
yeah,
I mean,
that's
like, do
fair.
you have any practical advice or ways where, that self awareness, that humbleness that you're talking about of being kind of introspectively being like, hey, what are the things that make me want to, do something? Like,
Right.
how does one, start to reflect on those things?
Yeah, it's tough, right? And if I'm truly honest, right, I didn't have social media banging at my door or
Right,
like on
right.
my phone. In fact, we didn't have smartphones back in the day, right? So what I would say is this, right, without getting too into the weeds, I think when I say being humble, I do think it starts there. Humble is more about honestly knowing where you're at. And I think it's about here's one thing that I always encourage, especially people I'm mentoring, is try and start with this. Try and start with, okay, every year, you got to do this check every year.
Mm,
You have to ask yourself, what do I see myself doing in 5 years?
mm,
Now, it sounds kind of funny. And so in 2022, I asked that question. In 2023, I'm going to ask that question again.
mm-hmm,
Some people go, well, 5 years, I mean, like, I don't even know what to do with that. Like, I don't think that's like, I don't even think that far ahead. Yeah, I
mm-hmm.
get it. I get it. Another way I would say it is, what do you see yourself doing in 60 months? Does that help you, make it a little bit more closer to home?
Hmm.
60 months, and it isn't about you filling in like month to month and week to week what you're going to go do. It's more about what do you think you want to do in 60 months or in 5 years? And so if you
Oh,
said to yourself, well, I'm a college student and by in 5 years from now, I want to be filming movies, right?
uh-huh.
I think you have to then take that goal and then you have to walk it backwards from that
Mm.
point so that you can understand what is the time and what are the steps that are going to be required to do that.
Yeah, I love
So
that.
it's I think social media has a lot of good things about it, but it also has a lot of bad things about it.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a social media activity. This is really about you sitting down and really asking that question. I think social media tells you a lot of different things, even gives you maybe what's the art of the possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at the end of the day, it's about shutting all of that out, shutting all that noise out, even shutting out some of the other noise that you're getting maybe from friends and maybe even family, and just asking that question: Do I dare to dream? What happens five
Mm.
years from now? And if you can figure out what you think is going to happen 5 years from now, or what your objective is, walk it backwards on the calendar and ask yourself, what are the steps that I need to do to take that? Now, it could very well be in that exercise you're going to say, well, I don't think I'm going to be filming movies in 5 years,
Mm.
because I'm taking out loans in school, and like my parents are like dead set on me being an attorney. Even if I didn't do that and convince them otherwise, it would take me like 2 years to convince them.
Mm-hmm.
Like you may say to yourself, that's not even possible. Okay, if that isn't possible, then I think you can put that, if that's still a goal that you want to have, maybe that's a 10-year or 15-year goal, but in 5 years, you need to come with another goal. And
Mm.
that might be a goal that says, what could put me in a better position to achieve that other goal? Maybe it is in 5 years, I want to be doing a major that I actually want to do
Mm-hmm.
versus being stuck in pre-med, or I want to do,
Wow.
I want to be in an industry that might lead me to that. So for instance, let's say you're engineering and you're
Mm-hmm.
like, man, but I like esports. I like video games.
Mm-hmm.
Well, good news, you don't, just because you're in engineering doesn't mean you can't be involved in that. In that industry, there is so much going on in that space that requires things like electrical engineering, that requires a
Mm.
tremendous amount of data science if you're a data scientist, or there's legal stuff in the game and industry and content, in content and um, being able to protect content, streaming data. advertisements. There's a tremendous amount of things in that
Wow.
space that you could do. Let's say you're on this. Let's just say you're just you can't break out of this path, and you're going to be a doctor because you've just been convinced, and that's all you know. You're too scared to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Your research in the medical field or your work in the healthcare field, you might be able to draw like parallels, like say, how does video games build empathy, or how does empathy and video games help us uh, understand each other better? And maybe is that a way that we can handle like mental health issues as
Wow.
opposed to taking video games and like all of a sudden like I'm depressed and I'm all of a sudden very violent and I'm going to go do these bad things. So I think it's really about thinking really, really hard. And that's why I just want to say, Blair, I mean, social media is fine, but I personally think it's not going to help you if you really want to figure those things out. You probably need to just take that. I'm not saying don't listen to or don't, have social media by you, but I would minimize it. And I
Right.
would spend, this is the kind of thing you want to do, just really sitting down and doing some hard thinking. And I think it's worth every minute that you can do it, like more than an hour's worth of, Instagram or an hour's worth of TikTok. A minute is more than an hour of that. I would
Yeah.
just easily tell you that. So I know it's hard because some of you guys are just like, that's like what you like and you like watching YouTube, and I get it. But I think if you really think about wanting to do something that where you're really controlling or driving an outcome,
Mm-hmm.
it's time to like put those things aside and say, I'll come back to that. But
Yeah.
right now, I need to do some real thinking. And don't be discouraged if you don't come up with ideas. I think it's about wrestling with that. And you're not alone. Like some people I know, they're 20, 30, 40 years old, are still trying to figure out what they
You're
want to do.
right. Right.
So it's getting through that journey and just understanding and refining that. So that's a big way to start it. Um, I think the other thing is don't have I have fears just like everyone else, but one thing that I struggled with a lot was imposter syndrome, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of people have that. We just
Mm-hmm.
feel like, oh, I could never be that. I can never be the VP of this and that and the other. I can never be a CTO, or I can never be this great, surgeon. I can never be this actor or actress. I
Mm.
think you need to put that, you need to put that in its place by saying, look, I have a lot of real fears about it. There's no denying it. But at the end of the day, I'm going to trust that through the process of understanding who I am
Mm-hmm.
and understanding those things that I want to do, something will come of it. Either I will be convinced that that isn't the right thing for me to do because just the circumstances and maybe the skills that I have aren't suitable for that, or there's going to be encouraging signs that say, you know what, I do think there's indicators here that say that if I
Mm.
work at this, I'll be successful. And I think it's about doing that more than trying to get this all or nothing answer like oh my gosh, within the next 6 months, I'm going to know if I'm an actress, or by the next year, I'm going to know if I'm really ready for, to be a medical doctor. I think it's too easy to come up with those answers. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
about being methodical about it. And when you do find out, and it might be 5 months from now, it might be 5 years from now, having the courage to pivot and say,
Right.
okay, this is not what I should be doing, and pivot. Or if this is what I'm going to do, go in, go bold. I'm going to do this.
Mm.
So those are things I would really encourage people to do. It's not easy to have that mindset, but I think if you work at it, if you really seek to really build up the stamina to really go for what you really want to do, then I think you're gonna find that you can build up a resolve that says, I'm going to do this. But going back to my first practical point, you got to bring down the noise.
Yes.
So social media, like TV, those things are, I mean, they're fun. I don't mind. I play games too, but you just got to put them to work. You got to give them the time that they deserve, which isn't a whole lot of your time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I
So,
think, I would even add to that something as simple as even like your parents, like, just kind of I know you're a parent and I'm a parent myself now to little ones, but even I find myself now like this is what you should be doing, right? But even yeah, I really thank you, John, for sharing that. I really loved what you said because uh and even like the verbiage that you used of like okay, you can't think 5 years, then let's do 60 months. I'm like, oh, that's soon. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, what can I do? That makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate you sharing that because I need to do that with my own life.
Be patient, like
Yes.
I mean, this is stuff that I think takes time. And one thing I do see with some of the younger generation getting discouraged is that they think that they should just figure this all out or they
Mm,
should have the discipline. I get it. Look, guys, I was young and I didn't
mm.
have a whole lot of discipline. So I think it's about not giving up and really pushing towards some of these goals. And for some people, it's not 60 months. Maybe it's 36 months. Maybe,
Right.
it's something shorter. I chose that because that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's going and making the effort to think further out into the future and not just saying, I'm going to play this year by year, or I'm just going to have this goal, but I have no idea temporally how this
How
is
to
going to
get
play
there.
out. Right.
Yes, yes. Okay, so John, I'm really curious about your life right now because, what did you study in college? Like, does it matter? Like, what?
I don't think it really matters. I think it's about aptitude and desire. But just so you know, I mean, I was an engineer. I was a chemical engineer.
Okay,
I started off at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and then I transferred to New Mexico State University and finished my degree there. So
okay.
for all of you who feel like, oh my gosh, I should be going to Emory or Georgia Tech or MIT
Yeah.
or I went to NMSU. And just like a lot of you guys, when I left Michigan, I was pretty devastated because I was like, I've never heard of New Mexico State University. Like, I'm like, I'm a little concerned about my future, right? But no, I think the beautiful thing about living in this country and being in the educational system here, I mean, if you do well, there's a statistic I read about, like, I believe, like in Harvard, for instance, the top 5% of the students there generally are the ones that end up publishing and the ones that produce like great works of whether it be art or inventions or just doing research that gets like a lot of accolades. The funny thing about it is that stat exists across all the universities. So at New Mexico
Mm,
State University, the top 5% are also doing the same thing. So think about
mm.
what that means. That means that 95% of Harvard students aren't doing jack.
Right.
And at NMSU, the 5% that are doing what they're doing are better than the 95% of the people that are at Harvard.
Right, right.
So I
Yeah.
guess where I'm going with that is don't get too worked up about what school you're at. I think it's really
Yes.
about understanding, you know, what it is that I want to do. And again, that's a journey. You may not
Mm,
know at freshman year in college. You may not know senior year in high school. It's okay. But it's
mm.
about committing yourself to the journey of finding that out and really being diligent, and not letting it be something that is just a side thought or just a frivolous idea. It's something that I think you should take seriously. And when I
Mhm.
say seriously, I just mean you should really be intent on understanding what that is.
Mhm.
I don't think you should take yourself too seriously. I just
Mhm.
think you need to take the idea of discovering that as more than just some notion or some hobby.
Right.
So,
Yeah. You know how you were sharing with me about how imposter syndrome and like how, you know, if you just shift your mindset to believe that this is the things that you want and you can do, it's, you know, that's how you get where you are today. But okay, so I don't know if this question's abstract, John. I'm sorry if it is. But like I guess what I want to know is in your life, was there like a pivotal moment for you where you were like, you know what? Like this is what you made the plan and the obstacles that you had to overcome. I don't know, like
yeah.
something like that. Do you
So,
get what
so
I'm
I,
asking you
yeah,
or
no,
no?
I kind of do. So I can
Okay.
tell you it happened in different parts of my life.
Okay.
There wasn't just a pivotal moment. So I think it's hard for me to identify, hey, this was the moment that all of a sudden changed my life.
Mm.
So I'll give you an example of where I felt a lot of imposter syndrome.
Okay.
So when I was in middle school, my dad used to help me out with my science fair projects. Now, a lot of you guys are probably laughing because maybe your parents did the same thing. But like my dad really did help me out. Like he literally built the stuff. And like when I was in middle school, I watched him.
Yeah.
And then in high school, like we started doing projects together, and he was still doing a lot of the work, but I got more involved. And I always felt like, oh, it's really not my work because it's like my dad is really doing a lot of this. And he was a very, he was an engineer. I
Mhm.
followed in his footsteps.
Mhm.
And so I always felt like, okay, that's where my imposter syndrome was coming from. Like, I'm not a real engineer. It's really my dad who's the engineer, and I'm just tagging along for the ride.
Mhm.
But the funny thing about it was, as I got older, the things that I learned from my dad in those experiences. So this is kind of like it's kind of contrarian to how society looks at education. I do think that the idea in Europe around apprenticeship does seem to really jive for me, and I think it jives for a lot of folks. Like by emulating and doing what your parents may be helping you to learn how to do.
Mhm.
Even like I see so many people who have become great entrepreneurs and business folks because they were helping their parents at the laundromat or they were helping their parents at the donut shop, and they just understood, okay, here's how we make money, here's what needs to be made. I mean, they just got the whole idea, and while it was grueling and it was just this is family stuff and we just got to do it, when they by the time they got into college and adulthood, like all of a sudden the idea of startups became like, oh, I get that because like I've been
Right.
doing it all my life.
Yeah.
And same thing with me, like building like reactors and building like other things that people are like, well, how'd you know how to do that? And it's hard for me to explain because I'm like, well, I did it in middle school, and, and and it was me. When I say did it, I wasn't doing it myself, but I was like involved. My dad
Sure.
kept me working on that stuff. Here, turn this, tighten this up, mix this up, and I think that really matters. And so that journey of that of realizing as I got into college and into graduate school, people were like saying, "Holy cow, you actually know how to do that?" Like I didn't realize that I just learned that like last year, like kind of thing, was
Mm.
a validation point for me, like, oh, I did learn
Mm.
maybe in a way that I didn't expect. I also think that you get a lot of feedback from your peers and your colleagues. So without tooting your own horn or without making your head too big, I think it's important to try to listen carefully for the feedback you get that says, okay, look, I think you're a great leader, or I think you really are really good at thinking about new ideas, or
Yeah.
you seem to really present your well self the best out of all of us in front of the class or in front of this
Mm.
in front of the board. And it's not that you should put too much stake on any one of those things as like I've got it made, but I think it's an indicator that that might be something a strength of yours, and it doesn't mean you're done. It just means that maybe I need to keep honing that. Maybe I need to keep developing that and see where it goes. And if I hear it maybe two, three, or four times, maybe there's something to it. And I think you have to also be careful. Like there are people who are going to stroke you and say, you're doing a great job. I love what you're doing, but that's just small talk. I think you need to hear from people that you trust and that they
Mm.
are honestly going to say, you know what? I just want to say, like, when you talk about this, you're really passionate about it. Like, it's so obvious
Yeah.
that you have so much energy when you talk about it. Or, hey, I got to tell you, like, when you were doing this, it really felt like this wasn't your thing. Like, it really felt like it was a struggle. You weren't really into it, or some of the details that really needed to come out, you weren't even thinking about. And I think you need to take that criticism too and say, okay, maybe this is either A, something I need to work on harder, or B, maybe this is not really my cup of tea.
Mm.
And you can pursue excellence and still fail. I think that's important to acknowledge. Like you can work really hard, do the diligent work to prepare every day, and if it's not the right thing for you, you could still just be mediocre at it. I think it still could be honored as a good thing, but it may be just a realization that that is not your thing.
Mm.
So I think you just have to come to that realization and be open. I wish there was a formula I could say if this and this happens and you're good. I just don't think that's really how it is. It's more about really listening and seeing and really introspectively understanding who you are in that journey. And that's why I think I sometimes feel bad because when I talk about this, it seems nebulous, but it really is centered around honesty and humbleness about who you are and knowing that who you are is still evolving, it's still building, it's still developing.
Mhm.
But as
Mhm.
you take these different inputs and these different feedback loops from other people, friends, peers, you start to begin to see the picture of who you are. And
Mm.
some of it will cause you to say, okay, I am, and I said this earlier, I am really good at this. And once you know that, you're going to go bold for that.
Yeah.
That's what I want to go do. So
I mean,
I'll
I
take a
just feel like
quote.
that's what we all want, right? And it's like, as a young person, you kind of feel like, am I going to get there?
Right.
Like, is it going to happen? But listening to you, I hope people are like, they will realize it does happen. You just got to, I think what you said earlier, just be patient with yourself and, um, yeah, and just be aware of those things. Interesting. I'm like so fascinated right now.
I think, yeah, I mean, you have to be patient. If you're not
Yeah.
patient, it will, I mean, and Lord knows, there's plenty of times where I've not been patient.
Right.
So it's not like, oh, I got patience down. Like,
Right,
no one really
right.
has that. But I think you
Mm,
pursue patience and you're saying, look, I do need to be patient. I need to be honest.
mm,
And again, it goes back to also fear. Like, I think a lot of what it takes to go for the gold, go
right.
bold in something, it takes courage.
Mm-hmm.
And those things aren't easily acquired just by, thinking about it. I think you take little steps.
Mm,
Um, you know, I think you know, it's about being willing to take some risk. And people say,
mm,
well, okay, how do I even start? Well, you don't have to take big risks. You can start with small ones, like maybe it'd be as simple as I always liked vanilla, and today I'm going to try butter pecan, right?
right.
Or it's just something like I'm never a fan of spinach, or I really don't like, you know, um, I don't like kimchi or something like that.
Mm,
And saying, well, today I'm going to try it, and I'm going to try it as if I could like it.
yeah,
Like, I think that's a risk, right? Because if you're not into spicy food and you don't like fermented cabbage, it just doesn't appeal to your thought process. You might say, I don't like this texture. I don't like how this. But maybe for a second, take a chance and say,
right.
well, let me try to like it. Why do so many people like it? Like, maybe it's just a little bit about me needing to get to a place where I can at least be open to the idea. And it may still turn out to be a bad idea. Like, maybe you're still not going to like kimchi. Um, but I think it starts there, being able to take the risk. Well, at the end of the day, I still didn't like kimchi, but I'm still alive.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
maybe I'm making this a bigger deal than I should. And so hopefully that builds maybe the idea that I can take these little risks. And over time, I think you may have the courage to take bigger risks because you're starting to get in that habit of taking the risks as opposed to just going with what you know.
Right. John, I just had a revelation as you were speaking. Like with immigrant families, like maybe they were newer immigrant. My parents immigrated here in middle school, and so they were raised here in the States, and I grew up speaking English in my house. I'm the only child. I grew up in an affluent white neighborhood here in Georgia, and my parents always encouraged me to take risks. But I'm thinking as you're talking, depending on the family dynamic of an Asian American household, like I would imagine culturally, it is not normal to take big risks or
You're right.
risks at all. And so you saying this right now to me, I'm like, oh, like, yes, it is necessary to take risks, but maybe culturally there is something that keeps us from doing that because of the way or like what we watched our parents do and how they live or survive
Right.
in America without taking risks. They just want to get by sometimes. And yeah, I mean, I thank you so much for imploring that right now because I feel like a lot of the times what the podcast for me, what it does, and for other people listening is like kind of give that permission to like, hey, this is what it looks like when you take the risks or this eliminates the fear of the what ifs or what could happen or what does this look like if I decide to go down this path. So yeah, thank you for saying that. I
Well,
really
what's so ironic about it, right, is that if you think about it, for parents who immigrated to this country, that was a huge risk.
risk. Yeah, it was a huge
That
risk.
that
Yeah.
was like a gamble. Like, I don't even know if I'm going to even be alive after. So in a way, like after they made the gamble, made it here, you almost feel like they're like, okay, we got to play it safe because
Right.
we don't want to mess this up.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have the empathy. I think empathy is so important in whatever you're doing, whether you're working with other people in a startup or you're trying to convey a message or you're trying to understand how to lead a group of people, but understanding where they were and seeing kind of the struggle that they had, just getting to a place where they had to actually decide we're going to go to
Mm-hmm.
America is
Mm-hmm.
pretty darn big. And so
Yeah.
I think I acknowledge that, and I have a lot of compassion
Mm.
for them because for all the wonkiness that they have or the way they carry themselves, man, that's a big deal. Like
Yeah.
it's not small potatoes.
Mm.
So I give them a little slack because I know like that I mean, I'm not here on my own accord. It was
Right.
them, right? They brought me here.
Right.
And so getting to a place where they're finally able to say, okay, I think we're good, right?
Yeah.
And like, don't everyone, don't
Yeah.
mess it up,
Yeah.
right? I get it. And it's funny because then they're like, almost forgetting that they took those risks, saying, I'm here to protect you. Do not do what we did because it was a total flip of the coin. So it's kind of frustrating to see that, but then at the same time, I do have compassion because
Yeah.
it's not for the faint of heart. A lot of
Yeah.
folks did not make it over to the United States. I
Mm.
think people don't talk about that, but a lot of folks didn't make it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Um, okay, so let me see what time it is. Okay, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but John, I always ask people like kind of similar questions. And so what do you like most about your current job? Like what do you like best about it?
um, I would say that probably one of the things that I really like about my job is that I'm in a place where I'm basically working with very disruptive innovation. It's and I'm
Mm,
trying to solve really hard problems and I'm working with really smart folks. One of the things I also like about that is in my role right now, I have the opportunity to mentor people. And so
mm,
mentoring engineers, mentoring technologists, mentoring business people, um, I really enjoy that. And so it is, I think, about really building a culture of collaboration and openness and transparency, and doing it in a way that, in the Silicon Valley scene, it's pretty ruthless. There's a lot of folks there. It's very narcissistic. It's very like self-centered,
mm-hmm,
very self-entitled,
mm-hmm,
and people feel like, there's little or no time for things like kindness
mm,
and being honest. And I really am committed to trying to do that and take
mm,
the time to teach people that we can do things in a way that's more healthier and not so driven by say just profit.
mm-hmm.
Um, we want to do something that's equitable, and
Yeah,
so equitable does mean profit, but it's equitable for everyone. And
yeah,
that's a thing that I try to drive home and wherever I go, as I want to be equitable and try to show a selflessness about it. Because I think if we can show success by doing that, we're in a way we're saying that, greed doesn't have to be the sole reason why you're involved in this space.
mm-hmm.
Um, so I'd say that. I'd say mentoring. I'd say working with really smart folks, building really, really cool stuff, solving really, really hard problems.
Like what are some of these problems you solve?
Well, I'll give you an example of a problem I've solved.
Okay,
So, if some of you may not remember this, but many years ago, there was this thing called the BP oil spill.
I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
So,
crazy.
it was pretty messed up, right? So, at the time, I had, I had built and designed I would say I designed and architect a data center for the U.S. government, and this BP oil spill was a ecological disaster, and so Obama calls up this agency that I was working for that weekend and says, "We have a problem." He says, "Here's the problem: the oil spills, based on what our advisors are saying, is basically going to destroy all the fishing in the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh my Lord.
So what we want to do is we want to try and move those fishermen to fish elsewhere." So what ended up happening was they were going to move the fishermen from the fishing areas that they normally fish
Uh-huh.
and move them over to where the shipping lanes were, and have the ships move take a detour away from the area. So the fishermen would shift all their fishing to where you would normally have ships go, through kind of like freeways on the ocean. They
Okay,
would they would fish
yes.
in those areas. So for that to happen, they had to figure out if the water had any oil in it in that area. So they had these mobile like water testing kits. They were testing all of these areas in the Gulf of Mexico, but they had to get all those water samples back. So we had to reconfigure our data center, which was designed for regulatory computations and all this other stuff that I won't get into, and reconfigure this data center practically overnight so that we could accept from these mobile water labs their water sample data and then bring it back into this agency so they can analyze it and say, oh, okay, this water doesn't have any oil in it. We can fish here.
Okay.
So that was kind of an out of the box like solution because yeah, it just we had to rewire everything, and so we had to bring our teams in and say, here's what we're doing right now. We're going to take that all apart and rearrange it so that it's set up to allow for us to bring in all these water samples in from the Gulf of Mexico. And that had to happen like within 24 hours.
That's crazy. Oh
So that was
my
kind of cool.
goodness. Oh my gosh. Oh man. So you helped solve that problem?
Yeah. Oh well, I basically yeah, it was to me it was I think one of my strengths is I think outside the box. And so
Right.
we that's what we ended up doing. I knew how our stuff was set up. I knew how it was organized.
Uh-huh.
And so I knew I could rearrange and reconfigure it so that it would allow us to do that very quickly for them. So yeah, it was great. And so yeah, it's an untold story. Like people generally don't know like all the work that goes on in any given presidential administration
Right.
when those kinds of calamities occur, a lot of stuff goes on in the back that no one ever hears about. So,
Wow. So you've been in this government kind of stuff for a long time.
yeah, I mean, I've been there since about 2008, 2009.
Okay, that's a
Yeah,
long time.
yeah, that's a long time. People ask me, well, why, well, when did you start? And I usually say the reason why I started working in the government space was because of the financial meltdown of 2008.
Right.
When the Lehman Brothers stuff fell through and it was too big to fail and all that stuff, a lot of us fled to the government because GM, Coors, General Electric, I mean, all of these companies were like, I think we're going to like go bankrupt. So a
Mm,
lot of us fled out of the commercial scene. At the time, I was working for an international Dutch bank, and I moved to the U.S. government. I wasn't a federal employee at the time, but I was contracting with the federal government,
I
and
see.
so yeah, that was a reason why it wasn't just me. It was a mass exodus of people
Right, right.
who went into the government, and in a way, all of that top talent that went into the government ends up in the next 2 or 3 years between 2008 and 2010 and 11 ends up building a ton of really cool stuff because before that time, they didn't have access to those kinds of people. Like it
Right.
wasn't easily accessible. But with all of those kinds of people coming into the industry from financial services, from the manufacturing industry, all of these guys came in. A lot of stuff got built really fast, and the government was surprised. Like we usually take 4 or 5 times at this to get it right, and wow, we're building this like correctly the first time. And I think it was an injection of talent into the public sector in the United States
Uh-huh.
that, frankly, I think a lot of innovation occurred in that period of time. So,
Wow. Sorry, John, just to clarify a little bit, I know we've been kind of all over the board and I'm starting to gather information about you, but like for me, I'm you started as chemical engineer, but then and then you like can do a bunch of other things, it seems, and IT stuff and but like what do you feel like you are specialized
oh
in?
wow. So this is going to be kind of an anti-answer.
Okay, I'll
So
take it.
I consider myself a generalist. So like I have
That is
friends who
the most anti-answer I've ever heard.
yeah, so So seriously, like I have friends who think they are the Jedi Knight of like data science, or
Okay.
they are like the master of like electrical engineering, or chip design or mechanical stuff.
Uh-huh.
I'm more of a jack of all trades. And I
Okay.
think the beautiful thing about what I do is that I do see how it all connects. And I think
Mm.
one thing that's really, for those of you who want to get involved in this space, I do think it's very important to be good at a few things,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's really, really rare. We don't have a lot of people who see the big picture in a way that, like, not just from a business standpoint, but can look at it a little bit more deeper with some of the details. And so I have enough knowledge in different areas where I see broadly how things are interconnected. And many times we're just very focused on a particular discipline or a particular subject, and we don't see how it connects with a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it comes to building businesses and when it comes to building something amazing, um, it requires that understanding that's more holistic. And so, like for me, the definition of, for instance, innovation is the intersection of at least three different things. So being able to intersect multidisciplinary fields into one single idea, I think that's where innovation occurs. I mean, it can
Mm-hmm.
also occur just because like you can make a better smartphone or you can make a better TV. But when I talk about disruptive innovation, it's usually when two fields or two or three fields intersect at the same time. That intersection point is where interesting things happen. So I
Mm.
look for those kinds of things.
Wow. Yeah, it is unique. I'm so not like that, that I just find everybody that is like to be truly fascinating, and I don't even try to I don't try to pretend that I know what they're saying. But man, this has truly been so great, John, and I am so grateful for your wisdom. But I have to ask if you could, if is there anything that you would like to add to our conversation that you feel like you want young people to know, or yeah, would you have done anything differently, or maybe I don't know, you said you had a daughter, so I'm like, what is the wisdom that you would want to tell,
That she
a
doesn't listen
young
to.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I would say there's probably, like, I'll say this, like if I had to give somebody advice, there's probably
Mhm.
two or three things I think about. One is, I already said it several times, but I want to say it again because it really matters.
Mm.
Be humble.
Yeah.
I know it's hard. I fight with myself all the time, but try to be humble. Because I think when you see yourself and see others clearly, you can make good decisions and you can really begin to do things and think about things in the way that they should be thought about. Anything else is just noise. The second thing I would say
Mm.
is be kind.
Mm.
Um, there's a funny saying I say to some of the guys I've mentored, I always say, like, be nice to people when you're on your way up, so they'll be nice to you when you're on your way down.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important, right? I think it's important to be kind, because I think that's missing in a lot of, like, in tech. If you're going to be in tech, you don't see a lot of kindness. But just even in general society, I think we find ourselves um, with just a real lack of compassion for each other.
Mm.
Um, and I would say the last thing is make a decision to be an asset, not a liability to others around you. Learn how to serve others, learn all you can. One of the reasons why I know so much of things is because I got involved in different things. Hey, do you want to learn more about the finances? Sure, I'll learn more about it. Hey, can
Mm.
you help us with the operational side of this stuff? Sure, I'll do that. Can
Mm.
you be on call while we figure? Sure, I'll be on call. Can you work to build these systems? Sure, I'll help and work these systems. So don't be afraid to learn and just get involved in different areas of a company or an organization, or even from different companies and different organizations, because I think it just starts to build this wealth of knowledge, and you start seeing the connection points. You realize why people do what they do, and sometimes they're not even aware why they're doing it, but you see it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I would say, if there's anything I could do differently, I just wish I had more courage to do what I felt I should have been doing. There's so many times where I just kind of ran away or
Mm.
said it's no good. I can't do that. Or, I just walked away from it because I just felt like, I'd be laughed at, or, I just didn't feel comfortable. Like I had the ability to do it.
Mm.
And even if you don't have the ability to do it, even if you fail, in my language, that's okay. Like, some of the folks that are older than us, their identity is really driven by success and failure.
Mm.
But for the younger generation, just remember, like, if you don't succeed, it's okay. It's a path to mastery. It's not a failure. It's
Mm,
just a path. It's just a journey. So don't take it as a black or white sort of thing. Keep churning, keep moving forward, and you're just going to be wiser. You're going to be more resilient, and eventually you're going to realize after all of that experience, kind of where your life is kind of moving towards. And like I said, once you find it, once you kind of get a taste of it, like it's hard to explain, but somehow in your heart, go, be
mm,
bold, boom, just pivot
mm.
and just jump for it. So,
Man, I can only pray about those opportunities.
what are you talking about? You're
But
so young. You're gonna find those opportunities. Don't be discouraged. Don't yeah. Just you got to keep at it. It's
yeah,
a
no,
journey.
absolutely, absolutely. Man, John, thank you so much. I hate to put you on the spot one last time, but if there's anybody listening that maybe has more questions about what we talked about, would you be okay with me connecting you somehow?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Awesome. Well, guys, thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me on social media or you can email me at podcastwigu@gmail.com. John, thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate you today.
Thanks, Blair.
Until next time, bye, guys.
Bye. See you guys.